on the front between Israel and Syria. Shabbat Shalom. Hope you all are doing well. I'm not literally at the front lines, if you're wondering. I'm a little distance away from there, where it's still relatively safe to walk around and do things in. Obviously, I'm not standing on the border between Israel and Syria. If you are ever there, by the way, if you've never been there, it's quite an experience. If you have been there, you know that until recently, as in until last Sunday, not even a week ago, when the Syrian army was there, if there was anything you had to be careful about, it was Syrian snipers, right? Who are infamous for their lethal accuracy at high distances. Because, well, they were forced to train to be really good. And if they were ever caught attempting to abandon their posts, their officers were trained to end them. But we saw how that failed last Sunday when the Syrian snipers and their officers and all the other regular ground troops that were stationed at those bases promptly abandoned those bases, right? Why did they do that? Well, consider all of the different challenges faced, right? They were basically facing abandonment by their system. If their leader had fled the country, the HTS terrorists that had formed this alliance with all these other groups, some affiliated with Al Qaeda or Islamic State, some not, some against them, some Kurds, some anti-Kurds, a whole hodgepodge of just everyone who hated Bashar Assad got together and finally figured out a way to coordinate themselves after years of training, possibly with some assistance from other places. And they learned how to train and kind of act like a kind of a military, attack and retreat, take over as necessary pieces of land, and to not just go full terrorist hoodlum with every victory, but to actually remain disciplined and sort of follow certain rules of combat and not horrify the world, because that would have solidified more support for Assad. And they were very intelligent, if you want to put it that way, in how they accomplished their victory over Assad. And when he fled, his entire military collapsed. Part of the reason is because the military had been run based on fear and brute force. And he did not pay his officers very well. And he paid his soldiers even worse than that. In fact, many of the officers that he had paid would send their whole, so, hey, how you doing? Hello. Hi. Hi, Shalom. Many of the officers had been paid as little as like $50 a month or something as a salary. Where am I from? I'm in Israel right now. I'm originally from America and elsewhere, but yeah, born in the USA. And they had gotten about $50 a month salary as officers, and their soldiers were getting somewhere between $10 and $20 per month as a salary. And they would be facing an army of bad guys, supposedly, from their perspective, bad guys, who were getting paid a couple thousand a month for soldiers and more for officers. So the price comparison, if you will, of these soldiers There was no comparison. Who was getting paid a lot more and who was better equipped to a certain degree when it comes to man-to-man fighting, but who had heavier arms was obviously the Syrian army. Had the heavy arms, had the anti-tank missiles, anti-aircraft missiles. They had aircraft, helicopters, all kinds of different planes, warships, lots of ground vehicles. But the Syrian army didn't have the willpower to face up to these groups of terrorists and other rogue rebel groups and all this kind of stuff. Why? Because they weren't getting paid anything. Their dictator had left. They abandoned them. They knew that if they held their post, there was a chance that they might get overrun and be ended. And for what? To die for a dictator who's gone? They didn't want to just die for a former dictator. What's the point of that, right? So they literally ditched their uniforms and their gun, and in many cases, they just went back home literally in their underwear or whatever, change of clothes they had. If they had any civvies with them, they just changed into those and went home in those. Like, not even a joke. A lot of them literally just took off their uniforms on the spot and left because they didn't want to be seen wearing Syrian army clothing, because otherwise it would be immediately recognizable and possibly be ended, right? And just so you know, even though there haven't been supposedly large amounts of eliminations of people in the Syrian army by the people who took over, there have been some. And, call it jungle justice, call it whatever you want to call it, kangaroo court, or just blatant execution. There's this guy who had a lion as a pet who was in the Syrian army. He used to be a cab driver, then he got into the army, became a commander of some despicable unit that did all kinds of terrible things to people. He stole a lion from some zoo, and he used that lion to eliminate people. And he was, infamous for it, notorious for it. And he was hanged, I think, a day or two ago when he was caught by some rebel groups. So why did they abandon their post? Well, they abandoned their post because they were poorly paid, poorly motivated. They had nothing. They had no motivation once their leader left. Right? It was like, what's the point? Right? Why not at least save your own life? What, are you going to die for a guy who used to be a dictator that paid you garbage? Right? Paid you, $10 a month, $20 a month to be a soldier in his army. That if you tried to leave, you'd be ended. Back when he was still around. He governed out of fear, like most dictators. And once the fear was gone, his army was like, yeah, you're not even here anymore. And the bad guys are coming to town. There's nothing stopping them. And the army's certainly not able to stop them. This is over. China's not, helping, which nobody even talks about that. But if you don't think China was helping Syria, you got another thing coming, right? Iran was not helping, which was a lot of money for Syria. And of course, they provided the money for Hezbollah to help Syria. They provided more than money, too. They provided tons of weapons and training and all kinds of other things. Russia, obviously, did not help. They pulled out because they're too busy in Ukraine trying to consolidate land and take over as much as they can in the next month, right? Because they think they can force that country to give up whatever it has lost to them in the last couple of years, 3 years. If you remember, Putin said it would take 3 days to take over Kiev. It's been now almost 3 years. He hasn't taken over Kiev, right? Ultimately, can Russia defeat Ukraine if nothing is done to help Ukraine win? Yeah, because Russia has a kind of merciless and massive military machine, which, although it's old and clunky in the way it does things, they have such an overwhelming amount of it. It's overwhelming brute force that can win the day for them, even if it's slow and lumbering. Remember, like, they lost millions and millions of people, many millions of people in World War II, and yet they persevered. Why? Because they refused to give up. They're just like, well, we're going to keep fighting these Nazis. Right? They didn't care, right? So they just kept pushing ahead, and they eventually, outlasted the Nazis, and the Nazis never conquered the Soviet Union, right? And of course, it was thanks to the fact that the Americans and the British and the Allies got together on the west side of Europe and, pincered the Nazis. So on the east side, they were fighting the Russians. On the west side, they were fighting Western Europeans and Americans. So the Nazis got defeated that way. But here in the case with Syria, right, the Russians had to pull out their assets from Syria because they don't have any ability really right now to sustain keeping all of their troops in Syria, because a lot of their naval assets have been destroyed or damaged in the Black Sea. A lot of their ground forces have been wiped off the face of the earth. And yeah, sure, they can still call up more reserves, and they can call up more military active duty, and they can make it a full-scale war, because technically it's not even, for Russia, a full-scale war. It's like a major police action, right? Even though it involves their army, it's actually an invasion of another country. But politically, they have the ability to ratchet up the drumbeat of war, if you want, and to secure even more soldiers actively. So there's a lot that they could do in Ukraine, but very little they can do in Syria. And they abandoned Assad. They decided, that's it, we're not done. We're not helping this guy out anymore. So he had nowhere, he had nothing to do except flee, which he did. And where did he go? He went to Russia, obviously. Right. Meanwhile, Israel saw that and saw that power vacuum and said, we need to fill that power vacuum. We can't just let all these abandoned posts and all this abandoned military equipment sit in there. And all the leftists and all the Arabists and all the people who supported Assad against the rebels and against his own people are saying, oh, Israel is so evil. Why are they taking out Syrian military equipment? Do you want the terrorists to take them? Oh, you should have left them for the Kurds. Do you have any guarantee that it would have stayed in Kurdish hands? Why should they leave chemical weapons? They should blow up as many of those things as they can and take them out. The factories where they make them and stuff. There's a whole bunch of them where they didn't take them out because they're semi-active or whatever, and if you just blow them up, it can cause serious problems. But now you have international monitors there, in theory, working with these terrorist guys to limit, and to destroy these things, basically. Because this group has said that they're actually not going to use those things and that they will disarm them and everything else. We'll see. Time will tell. Anyway, that's going to do it for now, folks. I'll catch you guys later. Talk to you later. Bye.